Okay, so today I'm talking to my old friend Grant Sissons, who is a fellow composer and general creative. Who he's done a lot of stuff. He's composed for a bunch of brands, and he was in fact the top ranked Loeries composer for 2019, which is definitely a quite an achievement. So I'm going to be talking or we're going to be talking a lot about music and his creative process and maybe where music may be going in the future and anywhere else that our fancies take us. So, the first thing that I've actually really always wanted to know about you, Grant, is how did you get into this music thing originally?
Sure. It's been a bit of a journey, I guess. I guess my journey with music starts mostly in high school, and bands. And I guess even before that, I bought an electric guitar, not knowing that it needed an amp, which was a bit of a disappointment for a while. And then I guess just I always think there's an obsession that has to kind of be in place, and I definitely recognize that in myself, and especially in those early days where I had a Tascam 4-track recorder, and I used to record on my own for hours, just making stuff and recording, and then sometimes freaking myself out because on those 4 tracks, if you've recorded on one side and then you're recording on the other, sometimes you get backwards music playing while you're trying to record. And I often would think maybe the voices were speaking to me. There would be those moments. But a lot of it was just an obsession with trying to find a thing, I guess, trying to find something. I can't always articulate what that was. And then I joined bands, played in a band with you here.
Yeah. So, but really, I guess what I'm getting at is what was the thing that switched you on to music? What like was it your parents? Did they play you music when you were a kid? And then as a teenager, was there a kind of like a little revolution in your head about what music could be and what, because there's often like a sort of sense of identity that comes up with particularly kids, and maybe I'm projecting onto you my own experience of as a teenager, how I became aware of where like culture and music collided.
I mean, there was always music in the household, and from Elvis to Nat King Cole, there was always music around, and my parents had records about. So I guess I guess there was always that in the background, and then I, I always had felt quite. I don't know. It's hard to sort of explain, but when I'd hear a certain song would resonate, it always felt quite powerful. It always had quite a powerful effect on me, emotionally. There was always that kind of element. And then I guess kind of the 90s, especially for me, seeing that, it just looked as though there were ordinary sorts of people playing music. That's how the 90s felt. It was like, oh, you can pick up a guitar, you can buy a guitar and you can pick that up and you can start a band and you can become world famous, which was, I guess, at that stage, quite a powerful driving force. But I suppose to your point, for me, it was an identity thing as well then, because I did feel quite lost in high school. And I think finding music and that instrument, I think, it was the grunge bands that were like a huge influence in terms of that knowing you could kind of DIY this thing and just do it yourself. There was no barrier to just, to entry. Yeah, I mean, and then starting to play in bands gave me an identity. It was like, oh, okay, this is my thing. This is what I should be doing. And this, we actually released a demo tape, which was cool for a while until we played live, which wasn't great. And I don't think did any favors for our reputation. But yeah, and recording. I mean, that was a huge thing. We saved up a bit of money when we were in grade 11 or grade 12, and we saved up a couple of $100 each, and we made this recording. We had no idea what we were doing, but that was the adventure. I think that's always been the exciting part for me, is actually not knowing what you're doing and trying to discover the process and yourself through working through it.
So, you studied psychology in varsity, right?
I did.
And you actually majored, I think it was, sorry, yeah, you majored in psychology. And I've often wondered, like, how did that inform, or how does it still inform your artistic practice?
I'm actually weirdly been thinking about this quite a lot lately, and how even if I'm not thinking about it consciously, it's running in the background. And I think part of it is, I mean, I have a fascination with understanding people and personalities. So I have that's another obsession, is just, yeah, how people work, and what resonates. And so I suppose, yeah, it's not always a conscious process, but there's something about connection, I think, is the main thing for me, and trying to figure out, how to connect with people, actually, at the root of it. And music is that portal, I think, of all of the arts, where it is the fastest route often to connecting with people, getting that visceral reaction. So I think it has played a part. I can't always say how it has consciously, because when I'm making music, often it's a very personal, visceral experience for me. You hopefully get the goosebumps in a moment, and then you hope that that connects with people. That's kind of the most I can offer there, really.
So let's talk about those goosebumps. When you start a new piece of work, because you're also like quite a multimedia kind of person, you do like visual things too, but then obviously sound and music has been such a huge part of your output as well. What makes you want to, like, what's the drive behind making you want to create something? I mean, and let's put commercial work to the side. Obviously, the drive there is they're paying me, but you've been releasing a bunch of music just by yourself over the years, and yeah, it's always I always wonder, like, what is that sort of, where does that original impulse come from for different creatives? Like, what drives you to create something?
Yeah, weirdly, also something I've been thinking about quite a lot lately, and also realizing, you know, as I'm getting older, that I have certain obsessions and loops with things. So, music has always been one of them. I've gone through phases where I remember in 2015, maybe embarrassingly in retrospect, sent off an email to people saying, "I'm done with music. I'm quitting." Letting just letting you know. But some people did respond, which is really great. I really appreciated them responding. It was very nice of them. But yeah, so the more I've thought about this, and actually connected to something David Bowie said in an interview, which I found quite interesting, is that there might not necessarily be anything that special about artists or musicians, even though we probably like to think there is. It's that we become obsessed with something, and we can't let it go more than use this very loosely, normal people, where
Mm.
we have an idea, and we have to explore that idea, and we can't let it go, and we try and look at it from a whole lot of angles, and then might leave it for a bit and then come back to it. And so I think for me, that process is actually, I realize in retrospect, is trying to find something about myself selfishly through this exploration. So there's a drive, there's always been a strange drive to make stuff, and I've now just accepted that that's what I need to do and who I am. Not in a negative way. It's just acknowledging that I can't park that side of myself. That it's going to be around forever, hopefully.
Mm.
And so for me, it's actually an exploration, and I suppose in exploring the self, hopefully the positive outcome of that is that you explore other people as well. You're trying to understand the self, and then in that, I think there's the outcome is that there's a better understanding of other people as well, which I think is obviously quite a positive way to move through life.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm a universalist or not, but I do think that the human experience is, well, once again, I'm trying not to say the word universal. I think there are many universal aspects to the human experience. And as such, when somebody like you, for example, are creating something that as a result of you like trying to go through an idea that manifests as a form of creativity, ideally speaking, that will resonate with other people as well. Of course, it's the whole other question to this is, yes, you may be working on a like a personal thing that you're working through, but it's one of the curses of the artist that we also crave somebody else to absorb our art or to consume our art. So there's a kind of desire to communicate there as well. It's not just purely therapeutic, I guess, is what I'm saying. There's a desire to communicate something at the same time.
Definitely. And I think, it's interesting because I suppose, hopefully, as you become more skilled at this thing, you're better at communicating the emotion that you want to, and that'll hopefully have some sort of universal touch point. But also, there's no guarantee. I mean, I've just done a film now where, I mean, I've rewatched it for a first edit of it, and I'm not even too sure what to make of it at this point. It'll go through iterations, but I suppose the point with that is that we make these things for ourselves, especially in the kind of the passion project part of it, or and those artistic endeavors, and then you do hope that it'll resonate, and that's what, as you said, that's you are hoping for that. You are hoping that it will connect with someone somewhere, even if it's one person. That's amazing, but the control over that, I guess, doesn't sit with you anymore once you've made that thing and you've sent it out into the world. It will be interpreted the way it's interpreted. And, you have to be open to that as well, because you'll make a piece of music and you'll get that goosebump moment. But that within a 3 minute or 4 minute song, that might exist at different points for somebody, or they might not get that moment at all and not engage with what you've made. But I guess that's not within our control anymore, unless we start forcing people to react in a certain way by, I don't know, under pressure of something. But yeah, and that's all you can really do. I suppose in some ways it's the Rick Rubin understanding of how these things work, which I tend to agree with to a large extent. But then it's interesting in the commercials world and more sort of work orientated, it is your responsibility, and this is where the skill and the craft lies. It is your responsibility to communicate a certain emotion or feeling.
Yes.
Whatever the director's after or the agency, that is what you are trying to collaborate on.
Yeah, so what you just said there really brought up a specific word for me, which was control, which is there's a real tension around control when it comes to creativity, because on one level, of course, you are like you just in the act of creating something, you are like channeling something into something else. But at the same time, there's this problem, for example, that I have where I try to be like too controlling. So I've got like a billion pieces of music in my vault that will never be released because they're not ready to be released yet, which is a very real, I think, creative problem where you're like, for me, often my favorite artists are the ones who are willing to let go of their work even though it's not perfect, and in fact the imperfections often add to the piece of work.
Yeah, completely. And what I love about that approach as well is that I don't know if you've ever had this, but I'll compose something and then just realize it's really not great. But then within the process, I might find, oh, okay, if I sample this thing, even if it's the whole track that ends up being like a 5 second sample for something else that then really becomes quite good. It's the process of it. So I guess, even for artists like that who I love as well, where they'll release something and you think, wow, this is brave. They've done something here that I would never have done. But I think it's the process, because then it'll lead to something else. Then, some other idea or germ of an idea, which I love. It's just an iterative. This whole thing feels. I do wish it was more. There were more epiphanies attached to it, like if you woke up with yesterday in your head. I do wish for those moments, but A lot of it just feels iterative. It just feels as though it's one thing, the stepping stone to the next thing, and it can cross media as well, where it's like, oh, okay, that now that makes sense because of a song that I did a while ago. It's like, oh, that belongs there. So yeah, for me, I mean, and I say unfortunately, but it's not really the right way to phrase it. But I just keep hoping for the epiphanies, the
Mm.
big sort of lightning bolt moments. But for me, it's always been quite iterative, and that's just I've accepted it. It's not a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And even those lightning bolt moments are kind of because like I get those lightning bolt moments, but invariably I'll have that lightning bolt moment and I'll be like, yeah, this is just hitting the nail right on the head. And then I'll come back and listen to it tomorrow and I'll be like, no,
No,
didn't happen.
yeah,
So even those lightning bolt moments for me, they happen, but they're actually, I don't want to say they're red herrings exactly because they're not. They're like signposts to say, yes, you're moving in the right direction, but invariably, like what's a lightning bolt moment for me is not necessarily a lightning bolt moment for the work generally. Like I'll get back the next day and I'll be like, oh, okay, I guess I've still got some work to do here.
yeah. And like you said, there's sort of no good or bad signposts either because they'll even if you've done a whole track and you're a bit disappointed, I guess it gives you direction then as well, because then you'll sort of say, okay, so it's not that. It's not that idea.
Mm,
I
yeah,
guess that's a marker in itself. That's still keeping you on track. It just doesn't feel like it at the time because you're so excited. I mean, I know those moments. You go to bed thinking, you know, you're thinking, I want to be careful here, but it's like that was genius. Like there's
yeah.
genius happening. And then and then the next morning, it's just like, "Oh, this is really not great. The world will never hear or see this thing," you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I like what you said about also exploring an idea just so that you know that it's not the idea actually. And I think that can be very helpful in commercial situations as well, where you know that your client is going to ask you for an option. So you have to, even though you know it's the wrong option, you have to make it and you have to make it in good faith to the best of your ability just to explore that idea, just to then say, I had to explore this idea, even though it's probably not the right way to go.
Yeah, and I think, the commercials composing thing is tricky because you might it's a strange collaborative effort where you're almost so it's not as if you and I are working together, let's say on a commercial where we can bounce ideas off of each other, or we can also guide each other and go, you know, that's not that's not the genius you thought it was. But let's keep, and we speak a similar language, even though you have the theory and training that I don't. But it's interesting and I found also that collaborative thing. It's quite interesting working in film because you feel the collaborative thing a lot more. Also, where people will say to you, oh, don't know about that or whatever, but you're speaking a similar language. Whereas the composing for commercials is interesting because you do feel quite alone because you'll be talking to certainly I feel where you're talking to creatives who aren't musicians necessarily, and you're communicating on like it's a strange way of communicating. I find it's still collaborative, and you're still guiding each other. But I just find it's a different kind of collaboration, and it can be quite tricky because sometimes hear a note that says something like could you make it a little bit more yellow or blue, and you're going,
Mm.
I mean, we'll we'll get there, I guess. I don't know what that means, but we'll get there.
Yeah, and I think to give those creatives the due, they're obviously doing an incredibly hard job in and of themselves because they've got these brands that are kind of breathing down their neck. Their brands have an obligation to their shareholders to move product off the shelves. And so the creatives, and that's ultimately what we're doing. Like we have an obligation to our clients to help them to do that thing too. So it's a tricky balancing act because the clients are very aware of what their needs are, but they're not necessarily creative in the same way that creatives and agencies are. And then creatives and agencies aren't necessarily creatives in the same way that, for example, film directors or musicians are. So it can often feel like a line of broken telephones that you're trying to somehow find some sort of like through line and hit some kind of mark.
Yeah, and that's yeah, the creatives from all angles are doing their best to communicate what it is that they are after, but we're all speaking sort of different languages in some sense. We eventually get there, which is amazing, and sometimes it's quite surprising. Wow, this was tricky, and of course we got there, and that's testament to everybody involved and navigating and collaborating. But it is quite interesting to me that it is sort of different languages, and then but you get there. You inevitably get there. There aren't many projects where it's just you're composing a symphony and people are looking for an electronic piece, for example. So yeah, it's a fascinating process.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's also there's like even in that bigger process, there's it's often the best of those projects are often really about finding the sweet spot between control and chaos. Where and that sweet spot I think is different for every project as well. Like some projects require a high degree of control, and other projects require a high degree of chaos for it to work. So it's and for me, so much, and this is not just in creativity, but just in life generally, so much of life these days for me is about finding that sweet spot, which is not necessarily the same in each different situation.
Yeah, I mean, and chaos has been yeah, I've had some really strange things to sort of think about this past year in 2025, and part of it is that it's the chaos. It's also kind of accepting because maybe as creatives, as you said, we are control freaks in lots of ways, and we're trying to wrangle this thing that is quite chaotic or can be quite chaotic, and then the world maybe is just quite chaotic, and we have to accept, to give up control. Maybe we just have control of ourselves and the way we respond to things, and that extends to music as well. It's like you can only control it so much, I guess. I don't know. It's one of those weird things where I feel often as though maybe this is the point that I battle to articulate exactly what it is and exactly how it comes about, but maybe that's the point. It's like the words don't sort of exist. It sounds very esoteric, but maybe the words don't always exist for explain what this process is. Because it just isn't that. It can't be you know reduced to words.
I totally agree with you on that. And this has been on my mind quite a lot as well, that words to a certain degree are like a product of your rational mind, but our rational minds, in my current thinking, our rational minds are only like one aspect of, or rationality is only like one aspect of our existence, and that I don't necessarily want to call it an irrational side to ourselves, but there's something that transcends rationality as well. That, like, for instance, creativity, or like really anything that you can't describe in words that still obviously exists, I think can fit under that umbrella, and we can say this is something that we can't even have control of. I suppose there's that whole idea that words are a form of control, like trying to control something or put it into a box or own it, when in reality, or I suppose this idea that words or semantics are a map, and what we're really trying to access is the territory.
Yeah, and especially if you go into if you into and I'm sure this happens to you often, is that you on whatever project, I find that you tap into a certain flow state or a zone that you access, and that moment is very hard to. I mean, I guess kind of maybe the point is that you don't try to verbalize what that thing is, because that's not the point. You go there, wherever that is, wherever it is that we access. Across and back to kind of your point from earlier, it's we all go there. It's not just creatives that have this access to it. You know, it'll
Yeah.
be you working on a project, even if it's very sort of logical or scientific, that will reach that flow state, and they go there, and they're just quite
Mm.
intuitive. And I often find that, especially on certain projects, I can't remember exactly those moments. Like if I look back on making that thing, I can't tell you even how it came about. It's just there was a there was an accessing some sort of state, and you just act, and it's intuitive, and you just go with it. And then afterwards, you're like, oh, okay, that's pretty good.
Yeah.
Like I don't really remember doing that thing necessarily, or you know,
Yeah.
playing that instrument or whatever it is, or coming up with those things. But that's the point, I think. You know, we're not trying to. You know, if actually chatting to somebody who's trying to, it's quite an interesting idea about trying to access flow state through VR stuff. It's quite an interesting topic, because you know, yeah, you do want people to access, you do want people to access the state more and more, because you know, I guess it removes a whole lot of inhibiting things to accessing that, and maybe kind of unlocking, I don't want to use the phrase sort of true potential, but there is something in that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think flow state would definitely be like I have experienced something akin to what people might call flow state many times, and I think most of us have. And while the semantic symbol of flow state may not fully encapsulate what flow state actually is, I think it's pointing towards a real thing.
Yeah.
And would be very useful to be able to access more easily. Although I wouldn't necessarily say it's the right thing to be in flow state at all times.
No.
Would certainly be very useful to be able to access it at certain key points in one's day or in one's creative process. Because, and when I say creative process, I mean that very loosely. Like, I think a project manager, or in our world, like a producer is also a very creative person, but they're just creative in a different way to the way a director might be.
Yeah. Yeah.
Unfortunately, I have hit time over here. I'm gonna like rush off now, but hopefully we can do this again.
Be great. Thank.
And for slightly longer next time, because I always love our discussions actually. And I've always like in the past, I've always thought not everybody is going to find our discussions fascinating, but I think some people will be like, oh yeah, there's something in there.
There's something that.
So yeah. Anyway, I'd just like to thank you for your willing participation in my little experiment, and let's do this again soon.
No, thanks, dude. Yeah, love our conversations as well. They always go off on so many interesting tangents, which is I guess interesting in itself. So thank you.